It was an accident, like most things that ruin you. I was cataloging property deeds in the Salt Lake County Archive for a dry freelance piece on pioneer settlements. Evidence of my descent from investigative journalist to historical blogger for hire. The room was a cinder block crypt in the basement of the old courthouse, thick with mildew, air still and heavy, humming faintly with fluorescent lights that flickered every 10 seconds. One of them popped and buzzed like a dying insect. I had requested documents from 1847 to 1852, mostly agricultural plots, a few marriage registries, wagon train manifests. That's when the archivist, a teenager with dyed green hair and half an attention span, wheeled out a cart with a single extra item on the bottom rack. A leather-bound ledger. Unmarked. No barcode, no classification slip. I didn't scan that one, she said. Want it? I should have said no. The leather was dry as a sun-cracked riverbed. Smelled of copper and rot. Pages brittle, browned, the ink faded, but not gone. The handwriting was meticulous, looped, Gothic. It wasn't a ledger. It was a logbook. From a settlement I'd never heard of, Whitmore's Hollow. The name didn't ring any bells. And I've read enough Mormon frontier records to recite Brigham Young's migration sermons in my sleep. But Whitmore's Hollow. Nothing. No mention in digital archives, no map record, no territorial census. The entries were wrong. Sparse, cold. Dates without years. Names without surnames. The fourth arrived. He said the stars are aligned. They've stopped asking questions. One phrase was repeated like a nervous tick. Obedience through covenant. Sometimes it was written backward. But what froze my hand mid-page was a number scratched into the margin over and over again, as if by a blade. 4. In Roman numerals, in slashes, even spelled out. Always 4. Then, one last entry. Smudged. Torn at the corner. A single sentence. The last wife never made it to the ground. Underscore. I should have closed the book and gone home. Should have turned in the archive key, erased the folder from my notes, pitched a fluff piece about salt miners. But I didn't, because there was something else, wedged inside the ledger's spine. A folded, wax-stamped letter addressed in trembling ink to the Office of Ecclesiastical Arbitration, Salt Lake City. Urgent. No date. No return address. I cracked the seal. Inside were 6 pages of frantic cursive, rambling, unpunctuated, and hard to decipher. It mentioned Mrs. Whitmore, then the second, and then the girl who never blinked. The tone shifted from pleading to desperate to something worse, resigned. The last lines read, "If you come here, don't look at the portraits. Don't eat the bread. Bury the fourth where she stands." The letter was signed only with an initial, C. Underscore. That should have been enough. But it wasn't. Because when I searched the county registry for Whitmore's Hollow, I found no town by that name. Not in 1847. Not ever. Except, under a different classification, defunct cemeteries, there was a land parcel. Plot 12B, East Valley. Previously, Whitmore Agricultural Annex. One note, handwritten beside it in faded red, condemned. No public access. Sealed 1891. I drove out there the next morning. It wasn't far from Draper. A patch of dry basin behind a chain-link fence overrun with sagebrush and rust. No marker. No road. Just scorched soil and the husk of a chapel. Burnt through the roof, still standing. I don't know what drew me to the broken foundation behind it, but I stepped over the fence. The air was hotter on that side. Still. Dry. Like the land didn't breathe. There were stones underfoot, not headstones. Flat. Square. No inscriptions. For in a perfect cross, the center stone had something scratched into it. Same number. Same fury. 4. And then I saw it. Etched into the burned lintel of the chapel door, obedience through covenant. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, every time I try to sleep, I see her. A pale girl. in a wedding dress, standing in the middle of that cross of stones, not moving, not blinking. Underscore, 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 underscore. I have to know who she was. Because no one deserves to be buried without a name. And no one deserves to be married 4 times to the same man without leaving a trace. After discovering the charred chapel and the stones in East Valley, I filed a formal request to access restricted historical documents housed at the LDS Church History Library in Salt Lake City. I cited academic research. They approved it, barely. One archivist glanced at the file code and muttered, "That lot's been sealed since the Morleytown trials." She didn't explain. I didn't ask yet. I was led to a private reading room. The folder was labeled Project Providence, Morley Extension, 1847 to 1853. Inside were brittle telegrams, census fragments, and one application form with a header I'll never forget. The Church Sanctuary for Displaced Women. Whitmore's Hollow Branch, a refuge for God's lost daughters. Under the spiritual care of Reverend Elias Whitmore. It wasn't a town. It was a reformatory. According to its official doctrine, the sanctuary took in unwed mothers, widows of questionable reputation, and female converts with histories of hysteria. It promised discipline, renewal, and godly companionship. One pamphlet from 1848, printed in Deseret typeface, read, "All flowers bloom when properly staked. The Father, as gardener, shall train them towards salvation." The file contained a list of intake names, partial at best. No last names, just firsts and vague descriptions. Martha, too quick to speak. Susanna, walks in sleep. Elsie, sings to herself in Latin. There was no record of anyone ever leaving. No discharge forms. No letters home. No grave markers. I found an internal memo addressed to the First Council of the 70, dated July 1850. The sanctuary at Whitmore's Hollow has reported excellent results. 4 of the candidates have made full transition into matrimonial obedience under Reverend Whitmore's household. No relapse behaviors thus far. Praise be to Providence. That word again. 4. The deeper I dug, the more I came to understand the scale of this thing. Whitmore's Hollow wasn't a fluke. It was part of a broader ecclesiastical project to reclaim women deemed unstable or unfit by early frontier standards. Most were either institutionalized by their families or relocated quietly by stake authorities. It was framed as protection. In reality, it was disappearance with a sermon attached. At the center of it all stood Reverend Elias Whitmore. Born in Kentucky, 1808. Ordained by Joseph Smith himself, or so one church ledger claimed. There were only 2 surviving portraits of him, one in a chapel registry, the other in the archives of the Territorial Legislative Assembly. In both, he wore a white cravat and a faint smile that looked more surgical than kind. His sermons were known to focus obsessively on the concept of spiritual symmetry, the belief that man's body and soul are stabilized through 4 pillars: labor, law, legacy, and laity. The 4th, he preached, must be in balance. If one wife passed or proved unsuitable, a replacement was required to restore divine symmetry. That was the phrase, divine symmetry. An 1851 homily preserved in phonetic shorthand read, "He who is fractured in his feminine foundation is not a man of God." 4-fold union. 4-fold grace. 1 wife is chance. 2 is conflict. 3 is temptation. For his order, it wasn't metaphorical. Whitmore married 4 women between 1847 and 1852, all former residents of the sanctuary. Their names? Gone. Not in civil records. Not in marriage registries. But buried in an administrative ledger. I found their entries, cross-referenced only by initials and relocation to pastoral oversight. MSSWEH. And C. The one who wrote the letter. That same initial. The final voice in the ledger. The one who warned, "Don't look at the portraits. Underscore 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 by 1853, the sanctuary had vanished from church records. Officially, it was dismantled due to drought and reabsorbed into the Great Basin Cooperative. But behind that bureaucratic phrasing, I found a final, handwritten notation in red ink on the last memo. Chapel compromised. Fourth remains unsanctified. Site to be sealed indefinitely. Recommend fire. I can't stop thinking about that line. Fourth remains unsanctified. Was she uncooperative? Did she escape? Or worse, was she the only one who tried to resist? Underscore 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 underscore. I've contacted the Bureau of Land Management about the site. They won't grant a dig permit. They claim the ground was salted in 1891 for agricultural research. Another lie, perfectly preserved. But I know what's there. I've seen the stones. Felt the heat beneath them. Something was buried, yes, but not deep enough. I returned to the archive 2 days later, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't stop seeing her. The pale girl in white. Not screaming, not moving, just waiting. Every time I closed my eyes, she was there, at the center of that perfect cross of stone. I requested anything relating to the Whitmore Sanctuary intake logs, 1847 to 1853. The request came back with a yellow tag, partially redacted, Institutional Repatriation Act. I'd seen that phrase before. It was the same one used to bury the records of disbanded orphanages and tribal boarding schools. They gave me a single box. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to no one, all unsigned, and all, eerily, almost identical. I have repented, and I am ready to be shaped. My name was not fitting for God's will. I am now daughter E. Please tell the Reverend I no longer remember my birthday. The forgetting is a blessing. There were over 20 of these. Different paper, different ink, but the same phrases repeated like liturgy. Same slanted cursive. Same final line. Obedience through covenant. I ran handwriting comparisons. Marginal differences, but the tone? Scripted. Programmed. Like someone gave them a script and burned the rest. I needed more. Through a contact at the Utah State Historical Society, I was granted limited access to the sealed testimonial interviews. Ecclesiastical Inquiry, 1890. It was a court transcript, badly scanned, half illegible, but enough. One woman, unnamed, interviewed by a state-appointed commissioner. She was listed only as former resident, age estate 68. Her testimony was full of stops and gaps, like her memory had been stripped away with vinegar. She said, "At first, they let us keep our names, but only when we were alone. You got a new name once you were chosen. Chosen girls weren't allowed to say I. You had to say she. If you cried too often, they'd say your soul was too noisy. You'd get taken to the mirror room." I searched for any reference to that mirror room and found a single reference in a site diagram dated 1849. A chamber marked reflection parlor. Beside it, in faded red pencil, someone had scrawled, "No speaking inside." Underscore. Later, in the State Archives photo collection, I found a series of black and white portrait sketches labeled "Recovered from Whitmore Chapel." They weren't dated, and the paper had warped from heat. There were 12 in total, each depicting a woman sitting rigid in the same pose. Same hands folded, same blank expression, different hair, same dress. At first, I assumed they were sketches of different wives. But something was wrong. The eyes. They were identical. Same distance between the pupils. Same dull, glassy reflection. As if the artist had copied the same face over and over and simply altered the frame. I flipped each sketch over. Only one had anything written on the back. It said, "I remember her singing once, before they taught her silence." That night, I drove back to the chapel ruins. I hadn't planned to, but I couldn't stay in my apartment with those portraits in my head. The basin was quiet, windless. I walked the perimeter with a flashlight, scanning the foundation stones. That's when I saw it. A slat of old siding beneath a collapsed section of wall. Carved into the wood were dozens of names, faint and jagged. Martha, Elsie, Caroline, Judith, R, H, daughter M, daughter E. Each name had been scratched out, over and over, violently. Some were buried under others, like a palimpsest of erased lives. At the far edge, someone had carved a single line that hadn't been scratched out. Do not remember me wrong. But it wasn't until the next day, back in the church history library, that I found something that truly chilled me. I was combing through mislabeled building inventories when I stumbled on an internal catalog entry for sanctuary storage, Whitmore's Hollow, dated 1853. It listed 23 items. Not ledgers, not tools, suitcases, each tagged with only a first initial, E, S, M, C, some listed as intact, others as contents absorbed. That's the word they used, absorbed. A note at the bottom read, unclaimed. Leave in West Annex. Do not return to sender. Final inspection to be conducted by Father Whitmore personally. The West Annex had long since burned, but it's where the prayer room used to be. I only knew because of one crude layout sketch that labeled it, West Wing, Obedience Chamber / Evening Supplication. One of the last notes in the archive was dated years after the chapel closed, written by a maintenance worker sent to survey the ruins in 1906. Scrawled in the margin of his site report, heard crying. Empty room. Stayed outside. No screams. No violence. Just slow decay. And names that were never meant to be remembered. They never rebuilt over Whitmore's Hollow. Even as towns sprung up all around. Draper, Sandy, even the prison complex east of there. The hollow remained untouched. A dead zone. On aerial surveys, it was just marked as unusable terrain. But old plans tell a different story. In an early engineering sketch, scanned, water-damaged, and folded into the back of an 1850 zoning petition, I found something unusual, a cross-section of the chapel labeled Providence Cathedral interior. But beneath it, faintly drawn in pencil, were additional levels. A full subterranean floor system, never mentioned in any public record, for concentric rings beneath the main hall. At the center, a small square room labeled only furnace. I had to see it for myself. _ 2 days later, I was back at the site with a retired land surveyor named Don Mathis. He had worked the region in the 70s and owed a favor to a friend of mine at the university. We brought ground-penetrating radar under the pretense of testing seismic soil stability for a faux research paper. The screen lit up like a cathedral blueprint. Hollow spaces beneath the ruin. Deep ones. Looks like a substructure. Could be a cellar, Don muttered. But it's weird. The readings curve in on themselves. What do you mean? I mean, if you follow this passage, he traced a red echo line on the monitor. It loops back around. That's not normal. It shouldn't do that. He packed up quickly after that. Refused to discuss it further. I stayed. I returned that night alone, armed with bolt cutters and a crowbar. The structure was more intact than I remembered, at least what was left of it. In the rear corner of the chapel foundation, beneath a tangle of scorched beams and collapsed roof, I found a trapdoor. Metal, ornate, blackened by fire, but not destroyed. The latch gave with a shriek. A stone staircase led down into cold. The descent was longer than it should have been. I counted 38 steps, then lost track. My flashlight dimmed as I reached the bottom, not from battery failure, but as if the light itself were retreating from the air. The first chamber was circular. The walls were lined with shallow alcoves, empty now, but each bearing small rusted rings at ankle height. Chains, once. In the center stood a dry baptismal font, its bowl cracked, empty, etched along its rim. Through stillness, she is made holy. There were more rooms. Narrow halls, each with strange architectural choices. Doors that opened into brick. Stairwells that ended midair. And one corridor, long, straight, that led me back to the chamber I'd just left. Spatial recursion. I found the journals in the third room, stacked in a locked cabinet with rotted hinges. Bound in linen. Pages stiff with mold, but readable. One volume, titled Quiet Years, Personal Reflections of Reverend E. Whitmore, chronicled his obsession with sensory purification. He wrote, "Silence is the crucible. In darkness, the soul is distilled." The fourth wife spoke in her sleep. She must be reshaped. Another entry described a ritual called the Rite of Still Waters. Administer opiate tea. Confine a chamber. Starve her of voice, light, sound. When she returns, she is a vessel. When she weeps without knowing why, she is ready. This wasn't therapy. It was annihilation. In a smaller journal, belonging to someone named Daughter M. I found sketches, drawings of hands reaching from walls, mouths sewn shut, a mirror with eyes that weren't hers. She wrote, "The walls hum when no one speaks. They get louder when I remember my name. He says the furnace makes us clean, but the smoke smells like teeth. And then this. There is another me down here. She cries when I smile." I moved deeper. The air got wetter, colder. I found another staircase, this one spiraling, and descended. At the bottom, a small chamber, lit only by my failing flashlight. There were candles on the walls, burnt to stubs. I passed by. One flared to life. No sound, no breeze, just flame. I turned. Another candle flickered on. Then another. I stepped into the center of the room. And there it was. The furnace. Not industrial. Not for heat. An altar made of iron. Inside, rows of scorched shoes. Small combs. Charred lace. Wedding veils turned to ash. And above it, etched into the soot-dark ceiling, the words, "For into fire. Fifth becomes flame." The candles flared brighter. The walls felt as though they were breathing. I swear, God help me, I heard someone whisper my name. Not aloud. Not in my ear. Inside me. I turned to flee and ran directly into a mirror. It hadn't been there before. In the reflection, I looked the same. But my mouth was closed, and I was sobbing. I ran. Up stairs that twisted and lengthened. Through halls that shouldn't have fit beneath a chapel. The candles never dimmed. Not until I reached the final step and slammed the trapdoor behind me. The whisper stopped, but I haven't spoken out loud since. I don't know why. 3 weeks passed before I could make myself return to the archives. I told myself I was done. I told myself what I'd seen in the underground chapel was a hallucination, trapped air, carbon monoxide, sleep deprivation. But that wasn't it. I hadn't slept since. It wasn't the furnace or the mirror that haunted me. It was what the walls said. Fifth becomes flame. That word, fifth, hadn't appeared in any of Whitmore's previous sermons or writings. There had always been four. For wives, for chambers, for rings. But now I was being told there was something beyond the pattern. Something the Reverend feared. Or served. That's what made me return. I asked for ecclesiastical property rosters. Church land use between 1850 and 1910. The clerk was hesitant. These were technically public, but hadn't been digitized. He let me into the back and pointed to a row of wooden file cabinets labeled M.Z. In drawer 3C, I found a leather-bound ledger with no title, just a symbol stamped on the front. A veiled face surrounded by four loops. A fifth broken beneath it. Inside, columns of names, dates, and transition sites. Whitmore's Hollow was listed, but not first. It was the eighth. Others included St. Germain's House for Virtue, New York, 1834, the Southern Harmony Reformatory, Mississippi, 1842, the Mercy Fold, Illinois, 1846, the Red Sisterhood of Salem, Massachusetts, 1871, and more. At least 22 sites across the country, all with similar classification codes. Providence Order 5. The same as Whitmore's. My breath caught when I saw one that hit closer. Eden's Haven, Provo, Utah. 1892. That wasn't unfamiliar. My grandmother had been raised in a group home in Provo. I'd always assumed it was a Catholic orphanage. She never talked about it. In fact, she didn't talk much about anything before 1940. She refused to be photographed. Changed her name 3 times. Had a peculiar fear of mirrors. I pulled her original birth certificate from my files. Her middle name had always been a mystery, just the letter C. No one in the family knew what it stood for. I followed the Eden's Haven thread next. The property is now a condo development, but blueprints from the 1940s revealed the original layout. It was identical in structure to Whitmore's Hollow. For wings, one central worship hall, and a subterranean level labeled sanctum. The symbols were the same too, carved into archways, stamped on old documents. But what made my stomach twist was a 1902 transportation registry. It listed Daughter C as reassigned from Hollow to Haven, due to instability and fire right. There was no surname, just a note beside it, marked but not consumed. That was my grandmother. I found more. A New Orleans warehouse fire in 1867 that destroyed a convent housing troubled girls, all records sealed. A textile school in New Hampshire where 4 girls were buried in a cross formation. A sanatorium in Oregon with a wing called the Reflection Ward, condemned for unexplained deaths in 1905. In every site, the same symbols reappeared. A veiled face, a ring of 4, a fifth line, severed or spiraling each time. The phrase, obedience through covenant, was either carved into door frames, found in marginalia, or printed in prayer books. And more disturbingly, each site listed the same overseeing authority, the Order of the Fifth Veil. No corporate entity, no religious branch, no tax trail, but referenced again and again in private correspondences, per instruction of the Fifth Veil, Daughter M, must not be buried traditionally. Sanctum relocation requested. Fifth Veil requires spatial reset. 1 letter, and signed but sealed with the same veiled face emblem, said, the flame must never remember its name, else it becomes ash. You know this. I needed a witness. Through a genealogy researcher, I tracked down the granddaughter of a woman who survived the Mercy Fold, one of the early institutions. She was 94 and barely coherent, but when I showed her the symbol of the veiled face, her eyes widened. She began whispering a rhyme over and over. One for law, one for land, one for love, one for hand. But 5 is flame, and 5 must stand. Underscore, 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 underscore. This isn't just about Whitmore. It's not even about Utah. It's a system. Generational. Mobile. Adaptive. An idea disguised as charity, reform, sanctuary. A mechanism designed to erase, reshape, and contain, especially women deemed disruptive or unstable. And always, it comes back to the same numbers. For his obedience, 5 is ruin. Underscore. What terrifies me now is this. If my grandmother escaped, then who was buried in her place? And how many more fifths never made it out? I never thought the story would end in someone's living room. Not a ruin. Not a chapel. Just a warm, dusty Utah home in a quiet suburb outside Provo. Cheap wood paneling, peach curtains, the smell of mint tea, and old books. Her name was Miriam Ashcroft. 87. Born in Eden's Haven in 1938. Smuggled out in a laundry cart at age 5. She had the scar to prove it. Thin, white, stretching from her collarbone to just beneath the ear. She called it her silencing stitch. It was supposed to keep her from crying. I screamed anyway, she whispered, voice trembling. So they put me in the mirror room. After a while, I stopped screaming. But I still saw her. Who? I asked. She reached beneath the cushion of her chair and handed me a photo. Old, bent, scorched at the corners. It showed a girl in a white shift dress standing in front of a burnt wall, her face blurred with motion. That's the 5th, she said. I don't know her name. None of us did. But we all remembered her. Because she wouldn't let go. Underscore. Miriam had one request. I want you to hear it. She led me to a back room. Inside was a dusty cassette player and a shoebox full of tapes. She pulled one out. Labeled in faint pencil, Fire Right, Testimony A. The tape hissed, then a woman's voice came through. Weak, cracked, maybe late teens. My name used to be Elise. I think. Maybe Elsie. It's hard to remember. He said I don't need it anymore. They tell you silence is safety, but it's not. It's a way to take your shape. You forget the sound of your own breath, and then you forget you exist. If you hear this, please remember me as someone who tried. Then, silence. Then, a low voice, male, calm. She is not ready. Begin recitation again. Increase dosage. The tape popped and clicked off. Later that night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by everything I'd collected. Photos, testimonies, transit logs, court transcripts, whispered songs, symbols etched in foundation stones. I had everything. Enough to expose the whole system. Whitmore, Eden's Haven, the Fifth Veil, all of it. A journalist at the Tribune agreed to run it. Front page. Special investigation. National attention. She said it could be the Utah Magdalene. But then she asked, are any survivors alive? Too many, I thought. And not enough. Miriam. The families of those buried girls. People who would be dragged into the open. People who'd spent decades trying to forget. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I drove back to the hollow. The ground was harder now, drier, cracked from drought. I brought 2 things with me. 1, the box of original documents. 2, a shovel. I found the place easily, beneath the scorched chapel lintel, down past the cross-shaped grave markers. The furnace room was still there, waiting, cold, silent. I opened the box, held the letters, the sketches, the transcript pages that had consumed my life. And I paused, because there, standing just beyond the candlelight, was her. The fifth, no longer crying, just watching. Her hands were folded, her dress torn but clean. Her eyes met mine, not with rage, not with blame, just one question. Will it matter if I get out? Her voice wasn't a sound. It was a presence, a memory echoing through the stone. I had no answer. If I exposed the truth, I'd tear open wounds that had already scarred over. If I stayed silent, I'd let it happen again, somewhere else. I took one step toward her. She did not move. I reached into the box, pulled out the smallest ledger, her testimony, and placed it on the furnace altar. Then I lit a match. Underscore. I didn't burn the whole box. Just that book. Just her story. Just enough to set her free. The flame crackled. The heat rose. She blinked once, then turned, slowly, walking back into the darkness. Gone. Underscore. On the way out, I found one last object tucked behind the furnace. Something small, easily missed. A candle, still upright, unlit, covered in dust. I struck a match and touched it to the wick. It flared to life. Soft, gentle, steady. I didn't blow it out. Underscore. The documents? I took them to a lockbox. Not to bury, but not to publish. Not yet. I made digital copies. Left a sealed envelope with the Tribune editor. If I disappear, publish everything. For now, I protect what I can. But I remember. And the fifth? She is not forgotten. On the morning of July 3rd, the state park rangers noted smoke rising from the ruins at East Valley. By the time emergency services arrived, the basin had collapsed inward, leaving a smoldering sinkhole where the old chapel once stood. No casualties were reported. According to the fire marshal's findings, an accumulation of methane from decomposing minerals caused an unexpected combustion event. No mention of sealed chambers. No mention of human remains. No mention of the furnace. The hollow was closed off permanently, declared unstable ground. No trespassing. A tidy ending. A signature. A buried truth. What wasn't in the report? That they found bones. Scattered, brittle, female, most underdeveloped, ages ranging from 10 to 20. No dental records. No matching registries. No living relatives stepping forward to claim them. They were placed in anonymous boxes and sent to Salt Lake for analysis, then quietly archived pending identity confirmation. The boxes were never cataloged. 2 months later, I tried to follow up. The evidence? Misfiled during departmental reorganization. The archive clerk couldn't even confirm they ever existed. The names I'd spent months recovering were gone. Again. Martha, Elsie, Caroline, Judith, C. As if none of them had ever lived. They even erased the fire. Local news barely ran a story. Historic site scorched in freak accident. The Tribune never published my investigation. The envelope I left with the editor? Returned, unopened. She'd taken a job out of state. No forwarding address. Her replacement had no record of my visit. The lockbox? Still there. Buried under a false name. But lately, when I check it, the logs show access attempts. I haven't told anyone. Not even Miriam. Especially not Miriam. Underscore 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 2 weeks ago, she called me. Her voice was small, uneven. I saw her again, she whispered. The girl. The fifth. She was standing in my mirror. What did she want? I asked. She didn't say. She just looked sad. Did she leave? No. She's still there. But now she looks like me. Underscore 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 last week. I returned to what's left of the hollow, illegally. The crater's grown wider. Fenced off. Marked hazard zone. But I slipped through. Everything's gone. Foundation, altar, stones. Erased. All except one thing. Half buried in ash, near the lip of the sinkhole, I found a single object. A locket. Burnt but intact. Inside, a sketch on folded paper. 2 girls. Holding hands. One smiling. The other faceless. Carved into the back of the locket. Nearly worn smooth. Do not remember me wrong. I took it. I didn't tell anyone. I don't know why. Maybe it belongs to both of them. Maybe it belongs to me. Underscore 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 underscore. I dream differently now. In one, I'm walking the old hallway beneath the chapel, the walls breathing gently like lungs. Each step I take echoes, but behind me, not in front. In another, I'm standing at a wedding altar. For veils lie folded on the stone. The fifth is already on my head, and every time I try to lift it, I wake up, mouth closed, sobbing. Underscore 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 sometimes. I try to convince myself I imagined it. That all the letters and files were forgeries. That the women never existed. That the fifth was just a symbol, a metaphor. But then I hear a sound. Not loud. Not violent. Just a breath. Right behind the mirror. Underscore 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 underscore. This wasn't one place. It never was. Whitmore was just one branch. The Order of the Fifth Veil, whoever, whatever they are, planted seeds everywhere. In homes for girls. In reform schools. In churches and basements and clinics with unrecorded exits. The pattern was never the architecture. It was the forgetting. Underscore 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 underscore. They don't need fire to erase you. They just need time. Underscore 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 underscore. I wasn't supposed to find this. That's how it began. But here's the truth. Someone will find it again. And again. And again. Because the fifth never stops looking for her name. And she remembers every time you forget.